Your soulmate shared your photo. What happened next changed everything. There are moments in life that seem completely ordinary until you discover the story behind them. A simple photo. A quiet smile. A memory frozen in time. Something so small that most people would scroll past it without giving it another thought, but sometimes, the smallest moments become the beginning of the biggest changes. This is one of those moments. You had no idea that someone was staring at your picture longer than anyone realized. It wasn't because of how perfect you looked. It wasn't because you were trying to impress the world. It was because your eyes carried a story of strength, a story of surviving days that nobody else knew were difficult. A story of choosing kindness even after disappointment. When your photo appeared, something happened inside a heart that had been carrying questions for far too long. There was a long pause. Then another look, then another. The picture wasn't just seen, it was felt. Every smile has a language, every expression tells a story. Your picture spoke without saying a single word. It reminded someone of the moments you laughed together. The conversations that lasted longer than expected. The dreams that were shared under quiet nights. The promises that were never completely forgotten. Memories have a strange way of returning when we least expect them. One picture can unlock hundreds of forgotten emotions. It can bring back the sound of a familiar laugh, the warmth of a hug, the excitement of seeing a notification from someone who once made your entire day brighter. That's exactly what happened. For a long time, pride had been louder than love. Silence had become more comfortable than honesty. Both hearts had convinced themselves that moving forward was easier than admitting what still remained. But one picture changed that. Questions that had been buried suddenly returned. What if I gave up too soon? What if they're still thinking about me? What if this story isn't over? No one else could hear those questions. They existed only inside one heart, but they were real. Very real. As the picture was shared, it wasn't done to attract attention. It wasn't done to create drama. It happened because letting go had proven much harder than pretending everything was fine. Sometimes people share memories because they secretly hope another memory will find its way back. Sometimes people revisit the past because a part of them is still searching for hope. That hope had never completely disappeared. It had simply been hiding beneath disappointment, behind every strong person is a collection of silent battles. You know that better than most. There were days you smiled while carrying pain nobody noticed. There were nights when your thoughts refused to slow down. You questioned your worth. You questioned your future. You even questioned whether genuine love still existed. Yet somehow, you kept moving. You kept believing. Even when belief became difficult. That quiet strength became one of your greatest qualities. People notice strength, not because it is loud, but because it remains gentle in a world that often rewards hardness. The picture reminded someone of exactly that, not perfection, authenticity. The kind of authenticity that cannot be edited, cannot be filtered, cannot be copied. Real hearts recognize real hearts. As memories returned, something unexpected happened. old misunderstandings suddenly seemed much smaller than they once did. Arguments that once felt impossible to solve no longer looked so important. Time has a unique way of changing perspective. The things that once appeared enormous eventually become lessons. The things that once caused distance often become reminders of how valuable communication truly is. Growth changes everything. The version of someone who once walked away isn't always the same version who remembers why they cared in the first place. Life teaches, failure teaches, distance teaches, loneliness teaches. Sometimes those lessons arrive too late. Sometimes they arrive at exactly the right moment. No one can predict which story belongs to which ending, but every meaningful connection leaves fingerprints on the heart. Those fingerprints never completely disappear. The picture continued circulating among familiar conversations. It sparked curiosity. It reminded people of happier days. It reminded someone of the person they admired for being compassionate when the world felt cold. Not because you never made mistakes, but because your heart always tried to love sincerely. That sincerity became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, you knew none of this. You were simply living your life, trying to heal, trying to become stronger, trying to believe that every difficult chapter would eventually make sense. You weren't chasing attention. You weren't asking for validation. You were learning something much more valuable: peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on someone else's opinion. The kind of confidence that grows quietly through patience. The kind of happiness that comes from respecting yourself even after heartbreak, without realizing it. You are becoming the version of yourself that love could recognize again. Growth has a remarkable effect on people. It changes posture. It changes conversations. It changes decisions. Most importantly, it changes energy. People notice when someone carries peace instead of fear. That peaceful confidence becomes unforgettable. As days continued passing, reflection replaced assumptions. The picture had started something much deeper than nostalgia. It encouraged honesty. Questions that had once been ignored demanded real answers. Was pride worth losing someone genuine? Was fear worth abandoning a connection that once brought happiness? Were misunderstandings really stronger than everything shared together? Those questions echoed louder than expected. Every honest answer pointed toward one truth: some connections deserve courage instead of silence. Not because every story ends with reconciliation, but because every heart deserves clarity. Life is too short to spend years wondering what could have happened if one conversation had taken place. Regret becomes much heavier than rejection. One difficult conversation often weighs less than years of unanswered questions. That realization changed everything. Meanwhile, you continued becoming stronger. You learned that self-respect and love can exist together. You discovered that forgiveness is not weakness, it is freedom. You realized that waiting for someone should never mean stopping your own life. Dreams still deserve attention, goals still deserve effort, joy still deserves space inside your heart. The more you focused on becoming whole, the more attractive your spirit became, not because you were trying to impress anyone, but because genuine confidence naturally shines. People are drawn toward those who carry quiet strength. Your journey had transformed you. Pain had become wisdom. Disappointment had become resilience. Loneliness had become self-discovery. Those changes could never be captured completely in one photograph, yet somehow, that single image reflected enough for someone to recognize the difference. It wasn't just your appearance, it was your presence. The calmness, the maturity, the hope that still existed despite everything you had experienced, that realization inspired something unexpected. Instead of hiding behind silence, honesty slowly became the stronger choice. No dramatic promises, no impossible expectations, just the understanding that meaningful connections deserve truth. Whether that truth leads two people back together or allows them to move forward separately, honesty always creates peace. Love has never been about perfection. It has always been about choosing authenticity, choosing patience, choosing understanding, choosing growth. Relationships survive because two people continue learning, not because two people never make mistakes. Every meaningful bond experiences storms. The strongest ones are built by people willing to communicate through them. As you continue your own journey, remember this: never underestimate the impact of simply being yourself. The world often encourages people to pretend, to perform, to become someone they think others will accept, but authenticity leaves the deepest impression. Your kindness matters. Your resilience matters. Your compassion matters. The way you continue believing after disappointment matters. Those qualities reach hearts long after conversations end. Whether someone reconnects with you or simply remembers you with gratitude, your character creates an influence that cannot be measured. Keep growing, keep healing, keep choosing hope over bitterness. Keep becoming the person who sleeps peacefully because they treated others with honesty. The right people recognize that kind of heart, sometimes immediately, sometimes after time teaches them what they almost lost. Either way, your value has never depended on someone else's timing. Your worth has always existed. Continue smiling. Continue dreaming. Continue believing that beautiful chapters are still ahead, because every ending creates space for a new beginning. Every lesson prepares you for deeper love. Every challenge shapes stronger character. And every sincere heart eventually finds the people capable of appreciating it. If your story brings two hearts back together, let it happen through honesty, mutual respect, and real growth. If your journey leads somewhere completely unexpected, welcome it with confidence. Either way, never stop becoming the best version of yourself. The greatest transformation was never the shared photo. It was the change that happened inside every heart, willing to replace fear with truth, pride with humility, and uncertainty with courage. Sometimes one simple picture starts a conversation. Sometimes one conversation changes a life. And sometimes the biggest miracle isn't that someone remembers you, it's discovering that through every challenge, you never lost the beautiful person you were becoming. The story did not end there. In fact, that was only the beginning. Days passed, yet something felt different. There was no dramatic announcement. No loud confession. No sudden miracle that changed everything overnight. Instead, change arrived quietly. It arrived in the form of reflection. The person who had shared your photo found themselves returning to it over and over again. Every time they looked at it, they noticed something new. Not a different smile. Not a different pose, a different feeling. They realized they had spent so much time focusing on what went wrong that they had forgotten everything that once went right. They remembered the way you celebrated their smallest victories as if they were your own. They remembered how you always believed in them, even during seasons when they had stopped believing in themselves. They remembered how you listened without judgment, how you stayed when others walked away, how your kindness never asked for applause. Those memories refused to leave. For the first time in a long while, they stopped blaming circumstances. They stopped blaming distance. They even stopped blaming you. Instead, they asked themselves a question that was much harder to answer. What could I have done differently? That single question opened a door they had kept locked for far too long. It wasn't easy. Looking inward never is. It requires courage to admit that love sometimes fades not because two people stop caring, but because they stop communicating. It requires humility to admit that silence can wound just as deeply as harsh words, and it requires maturity to understand that pride often costs far more than honesty ever could. While all of this was happening, you were living your own life. You had stopped checking your phone every few minutes. You had stopped wondering whether today would finally be the day everything changed. Instead, you started changing. You discovered that healing is not about pretending the past never happened. Healing is learning to appreciate the lessons without allowing the pain to define your future. You smiled more often, not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because your heart was no longer carrying the impossible burden of controlling things beyond your reach. You laughed with friends. You spent more time with family. You focused on dreams that had been waiting patiently while your heart was busy surviving disappointment. Slowly, your confidence returned. Not the loud kind that seeks attention, the quiet kind, the kind that walks into a room without needing validation. The kind that knows its worth without needing someone else to confirm it. Ironically, that was the version of you they always hoped to see, not because you had changed into someone else,